Earlier today, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken departed from Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland en route to the Middle East as the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas continued to hold for the fourth day. In a statement from the White House, President Biden said Secretary Blinken will meet with Israeli leaders about his administration's ironclad commitment to Israel's security. Secretary Blinken will also continue the administration's effort to rebuild ties to and support for the Palestinian people and leaders after years of neglect. In addition, he will, quote, engage other key partners in the region on reducing the risk of further conflict in the coming months, end quote. With me now to talk about the latest in the Middle East and more is Congressman Mike Johnson. He represents the 4th Congressional District of Louisiana. And as I mentioned, he serves on the Armed Services Committee in the House. Mike, welcome to Washington Watch.
Hi, Tony. It's great to be with you. Appreciate being on the show as always.
Well, good to have you on. I know it was a busy week last week in D.C., but over the weekend, more news as the ceasefire held, but pretty clear that the evidence makes very clear that Iran was supporting Hamas in their attacks on Israel. But despite that, this administration is still determined to renegotiate and enter into a nuclear deal with Iran.
It is really hard to wrap your mind around. And, I've been with constituents back in Louisiana all weekend, and they keep asking me, what is the administration thinking? Isn't Iran a state sponsor of terror? I mean, they are. It's the largest state sponsor. They're tied to the hip with Hamas. Of course, they're funding those operations. But the Biden administration has been reluctant to call it out. They've only given a weak repudiation of this aggression towards Israel. And Israel needs us to stand strong by their side now, arguably as much as ever. We can't have equivocation like that. So the Republicans in Congress have been very outspoken on this, but as you've seen, Tony, many of our Democrat colleagues, some of them have been completely silent, and the silence is deafening.
Speaking of our your Democratic colleagues, let's talk about the president. The president speaking out on Friday, once again saying that he supports the security of Israel, but there's a twist to it. Listen to this clip from the president on Friday.
There is no shift in my commitment to the security of Israel, period. No shift, not at all. But I tell you what there is a shift in. The shift is that we still need a two-state solution. It is the only answer, the only answer.
Your response to that?
Well, listen, Israel has a right to defend itself. This is outright aggression. You and I have been to the Holy Land, Tony, multiple times. We know that they're surrounded on all sides by enemies. And the two-state solution is a compromise that some members of Congress and most of the Democrat establishment agrees with. But you've seen, even in recent days, you have figures on the left like Bernie Sanders and Ilhan Omar, who are openly siding with the Palestinians, going along with their narrative that somehow their land has been stolen by Israel. Look, you're getting mixed messages from the administration and from the Democrat conference and the Congress, and it's a dangerous thing right now. Israel needs us to stand by them. We need Israel. They're our strongest ally in the region and arguably maybe our most important ally anywhere in the world. And we cannot have the White House, the occupant of the Oval Office, just playing both sides of this. We need decisive action, and we need it now.
It's very clear they're playing both sides of this, but also they're not being truthful, I think, with the American people, because here the president also said this about President Abbas. Listen to this clip 2.
What I've made clear is that it's essential. It's essential that the Palestinians on the West Bank be secured, that Abbas be recognized as the leader of the Palestinian people, which he is.
Well, first off, he's been, had an election 15 years ago, and he's still in office, even though he won't allow the people to vote again. But the reality is it's the Palestinians that will not recognize the right of Israel to exist. So how can you have a two-state solution if you have one party that is refusing to even agree that the other party has a right to exist?
Well, that's it. And all of the allies of Hamas, the Palestinians there, Iran, we talked about earlier. I mean, they've openly avowed they want Israel to be wiped out. They don't want it to exist at all. So it's very difficult to have a good faith negotiation about these things, to broker a lasting peace deal when you have the other side is just openly and outright in this aggression towards the nation of Israel. This is a very serious conflict that's been going on a very, very long time. But the thing that has kept it at bay, during the Trump administration, for example, was a show of strength by the United States. I mean, Jim Jordan and I were there on a trip just a couple of weeks before the pandemic struck over a year and a half ago. And we were with Prime Minister Netanyahu at the residence there, at his residence. And he was talking to us about, as he's talked to you before and many of us, about the importance of America being their ally, being there right over the shoulder of Israel and holding this situation at bay and keeping the peace. And when you have mixed messages, when you have this kind of equivocation, it really is. I mean, this is not hyperbole. This is a dangerous situation, and we've got to stay on top of it.
Yeah, I think that is the key, especially in that region of the world. It is strength that they respect. They may not agree with, but they respect it. I've met with other leaders in the Middle East in another capacity that I serve in, and it is strength that they respect. My prediction is that we're going to see more unrest in the Middle East because of the equivocation of this administration and the lack of strength. I mean, their top priority, global warming, re-entering the Iran nuclear deal, which actually probably many of those rockets that were fired onto Israel were funded with the money that the Obama administration gave to Iran.
Yes, and you've seen they put much more emphasis, President Biden and his administration, on re-entering the Iran nuclear deal than they have on standing strong with our trusted and true ally there. And what more can we say about it, Tony? We're pressing every lever that we can in Congress. The Republicans are 100% united on this, but our Democrat colleagues are pushing back, and it's really a shameful and again just a dangerous situation.
Well, I want to move to Nancy Pelosi, but just one of the last votes that you took on Friday before Congress left town for the holiday week was the vote on support for Israel, and your Democratic colleagues voted against it.
Yes, some of them did, and then they went out and messaged it again. Echoing this idea, repeating the narrative of the Palestinians, and suggesting somehow that our alliance with Israel is untoward in some way. It's really shocking, and they're getting more and more overt with their sort of anti-Israel messaging. And look, there's a growing element of that in the Congress. We have to be wary of it. The American people need to understand that this is the debate and the battle we're having there on the floor of the U.S. House. And it's a very serious situation for us.
Well, another issue, we only got about a minute left, but that is proxy voting. The speaker continuing to allow, even though every member of Congress is vaccinated, the pandemic is on its way out, but members can still vote from their lazy boy recliners back at home.
It's a shameful situation. We filed a lawsuit about this, as you know. Many Republican members of Congress filed a lawsuit to challenge this in court because I've argued it's blatantly unconstitutional. The Constitution obviously anticipates that members of Congress be there, gather together, assemble to do the work of legislating and running the country. But literally, that's what you have, Tony. You have members who are back at home, back on the lazy boy. Some have voted from their yachts. No kidding. We have video of that. It is not what the founding fathers intended, and it is doing great harm to the institution. Hopefully we can get back to regular order. But as you know, Nancy Pelosi is using this for control, as she does everything else.
When might you hear something on the lawsuit?
Well, it's in the early processes. There'll be preliminary motions. They're trying to get rid of that, of course, but we're not going to give up on it. I mean, there are some things you have to stand by, and ultimately the courts will have to determine this. It's a very simple matter. Does it violate the Constitution or not? We think it does.
Yeah, and it sets precedent, so you got to follow it on through.
Exactly.
Mike Johnson, as always, great to talk with you. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks, Tony. Appreciate it.